It was a quiet morning in early July 1997 when something truly horrifying shook the city of Washington, D.C. What initially seemed like just another start to the work week quickly turned into a nightmare. At a local coffee shop, 3 employees were found brutally murdered, a crime that would baffle both local authorities and the FBI for months. The incident happened right after the bustling Independence Day weekend. Thousands of tourists had just visited the city to celebrate the 4th of July, filling the streets with music, parades, and fireworks. But by the morning of July 7th, the festivities had ended, and the city was getting back to its usual rhythm. Around 5:15 a.m., the coffee shop's day shift manager pulled into the parking lot to start her morning routine. Right away, she noticed something off. The night manager's car was still parked outside. That was strange, considering the shop was supposed to close at 8 p.m. the previous evening. As she approached the entrance, things felt even more unsettling. The lights inside were still on. Music was playing. The display case was still full, as if no one had closed the shop properly. She called out to see if anyone was still inside. No answer. The place hadn't been cleaned, which wasn't like her co-workers at all. Curious and concerned, she walked toward the back of the shop, hoping to find someone who could explain the situation. Instead, what she discovered would haunt her forever: the lifeless bodies of her 3 co-workers. Terrified, she bolted out of the building in a panic and flagged down a city bus. The driver, alarmed by her distress, immediately called the police. Not long after, officers arrived and sealed off the crime scene to preserve any evidence. Among the early clues was a footprint found near the front entrance. It didn't match any of the victims or the shocked co-worker who found the bodies. The police quickly determined that they were dealing with something far more serious than an accident or simple robbery gone wrong. The victims were later identified: 24-year-old shift leader Katie Mahoney, 18-year-old Aaron David Goodrich, and 25-year-old Emery Allen Evans. All 3 had been shot, and it appeared the attack took place as they were cleaning up after closing the store. Katie, tragically, had suffered the most gunshot wounds. She was found holding the shop keys, suggesting she was preparing to lock up when the assailant or assailants struck. Detective James Trainham from the Metropolitan Police described the scene as deeply personal and filled with rage. "When I saw the crime scene and the sheer number of bullets fired at Katie," he recalled, "my gut told me it wasn't just a random act. It felt personal, maybe a dispute with an ex-boyfriend or someone she knew well. It was a theory the police couldn't ignore. Evidence pointed to a deliberate, targeted attack. But there was something else. The bullets came from 2 different types of guns. That small but crucial detail suggested more than one shooter was involved. Investigators quickly began piecing together what little they could from the chaotic crime scene. They recovered 6 shell casings from a .380 caliber semi-automatic handgun and found a .38 caliber revolver round lodged in the ceiling, right above the shop safe. That single bullet hole suggested a warning shot had been fired, possibly to intimidate the victims into handing over money. This discovery led detectives to rethink their initial theory. Maybe this wasn't just about personal revenge. Could it have been a robbery gone sideways? Detective Trainham leaned into the possibility, noting that 2 different guns meant there were likely 2 attackers, and that added layers of complication. Still, something didn't add up. Despite the violence, nothing was stolen. The cash register was untouched, and the safe hadn't even been opened. Whoever broke in, they left empty-handed. That detail shook the robbery theory at its foundation. As the timeline became clearer, a few key witnesses helped establish what might have happened. A receipt revealed one of the employees had purchased a pound of coffee at 8:40 p.m., indicating that all 3 were alive well after closing time. Then, around 9:15 p.m., a man stopped by and saw 2 employees working inside, but the front door was already locked. Shortly after, several other customers arrived hoping to grab a drink, but when they walked in, no one was visible. Cleaning supplies were out, music was still playing, but the shop seemed deserted. Thinking staff had stepped into the back, the customers quietly left. Based on that window, detectives estimated the murders likely occurred between 9:15 and 9:30 p.m. There was another twist. Both the front and back doors were locked the next morning, which didn't make sense if the killers had fled in a hurry. It appeared they had keys or had stolen them from one of the victims, and carefully locked up after committing the crime. This detail led investigators to suspect someone familiar with the shop was involved. Suspicion quickly fell on a former employee who had been recently fired. He had struggled with substance abuse and was known to have access to the safe and alarm system. Katie had let him go after discovering cash missing from the register. Though the store decided not to press charges, the ex-employee had agreed to repay the stolen money in installments. When police questioned him at his apartment, he claimed there were no hard feelings and that he and Katie had made peace. Detectives took photographs of his shoes to compare to the footprint found at the scene. No match. His alibi also checked out. He wasn't even in town when the murders happened. So once again, investigators hit a dead end. The autopsies painted a grim picture. Katie had been shot 5 times, Emery 3, and Aaron once, but that one shot had pierced both his heart and lungs. Most disturbingly, the forensic analysis confirmed the 2 guns had been used, further supporting the theory of multiple suspects. As the investigation dragged on without answers, the public became increasingly concerned. The coffee shop's owners, desperate for justice, offered a $50,000 reward for any information that could help crack the case. Tips started flooding in, but none of them led to anything solid. Theories swirled. Was it a hate crime? A politically motivated attack tied to Katie's short internship at the White House? Or just a cold-blooded act of violence carried out by someone with nothing to lose? Detectives combed to the backgrounds of all 3 victims, but nothing stood out. No enemies, no shady connections, nothing to explain why they were targeted that night. So they called in backup. Detective Trainum reached out to an old friend, FBI Special Agent Brad Garrett, a veteran profiler known for looking at crimes through a different lens. "I don't believe in magic," Garrett said, "but experience teaches you to see things other people miss." And just like that, the investigation entered a whole new phase. With Agent Brad Garrett officially joining the task force, investigators took a fresh look at the crime scene. They hoped that with a new perspective, something previously overlooked might finally make sense. But as they scoured the coffee shop for hidden clues, they hit a frustrating reality. The shop had no security cameras, and the alarm system hadn't been triggered. That meant no footage, no silent alarm, and no sign of forced entry. The lock on the front door was completely intact. It looked more and more like the killer, or killers, had entered using a key and left the same way, calmly locking up behind them. That level of control wasn't something you'd expect from a frantic, disorganized crime. Investigators began forming a working theory. The killers arrived while the employees were still cleaning up after closing. They likely used a key to enter unnoticed. Once inside, they ordered the staff into the back room, possibly at gunpoint. Hands up, no sudden moves. The idea was probably to rob the place quickly and get out. But something went terribly wrong. A bullet was fired into the ceiling above the safe, a warning shot, meant to scare the employees into compliance. But in that small, enclosed space, panic set in, fear escalated, control was lost, and within moments, all 3 workers were dead. At this point, detectives believed they weren't dealing with cold-blooded killers, but group or pair of reckless criminals who were willing to use violence if things didn't go as planned. That meant this might not have been their first time. They began looking into similar robberies across the region, particularly ones involving multiple weapons, chaotic execution, and little or no stolen money. It was rare for robbers to leave a scene without grabbing the cash. Unless, of course, something spooked them. Back at the coffee shop, a seemingly minor detail offered a new lead. A handwritten to-do list left behind by Katie Mahoney. Nearly every task was checked off, except one. She had planned to apologize to a co-worker she'd scolded days earlier for being unprofessional. Investigators tracked him down and questioned him. He told them Katie was a kind person, and he never held a grudge. At the time of the murders, he had a solid alibi. He was playing billiard with friends, and his whereabouts were confirmed. Another dead end. But then, something odd came to light. Detective Trainum, while digging through the shop's records, found out that someone had entered the building at 2 a.m. the morning after murders. It wasn't the killer returning. It was the bakery delivery driver, who had a routine of dropping off goods before dawn. He told police that when he arrived, everything seemed normal. The door was locked, as always, and he used his key to make the delivery. That explained why the door was locked when the day manager showed up a few hours later. Still, the question remained, how did the killers get in and out without setting off the alarm or leaving behind more evidence? 3 days passed after the triple homicide, and police still had no idea who they were looking for. No solid suspects. No fingerprints. No eyewitnesses. But then, something changed. On September 27, 1997, nearly 3 months after the murders, homicide detectives received an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end claimed that 2 men were responsible for the coffee shop killings. One of them, he said, was named Carl. He didn't know Carl's last name, but described him in detail. Mid-20s, brown skin, living with his mother, wife, and child on Gallen Street. He even mentioned the color of Carl's car, a strange shade of blue. Before hanging up, the caller warned detectives not to trust anyone who claimed otherwise. It wasn't much, but it was something. With the anonymous tip fresh in their hands, detectives wasted no time. They ran a list of all registered vehicles on Gallen Street in Washington, D.C., looking for any cars matching the unusual blue color described. It didn't take long for them to zero in on a name that rang some serious alarm bells: Carl Cooper. Carl wasn't just any guy with a history. At 28 years old, he already had a serious rap sheet. He'd previously served time for armed robbery, and years earlier, he had even been a suspect in a murder case, although charges didn't stick due to lack of evidence. Now, with this new tip and his criminal background, Cooper officially became the prime suspect. To build their case, the FBI got a judge's approval to monitor Carl's phone. It wasn't a full wiretap just yet. They could see the numbers he called and received calls from, along with timestamps and call durations, but not the content of the conversations. Still, this was enough to start mapping out his social circle and tracking who he interacted with regularly. One person kept popping up, the owner of a nearby barbershop. According to the tipster, this man wasn't just a friend of Cooper's. He might have actually been involved in the coffee shop murders. To dig deeper, the FBI launched a covert surveillance operation. They sent in agents posing as cable workers to install hidden cameras outside Carl's house. Their goal was to monitor his comings and goings, track who he met with, and understand his daily routine. Because the surveillance was happening on public property, no warrant was needed. The agents watched everything, from Carl leaving for errands to who visited his home. Through these stakeouts, they were able to identify his wife, his child, and several close associates. Whenever Carl left the house, undercover teams followed him across the city. Unsurprisingly, one of his regular stops was a barbershop run by the alleged accomplice. To confirm the connection, they tapped the barber's phone too. His background wasn't clean either. He had also done time for robbery. So now, agents had 2 men with criminal pasts and close ties, both capable of violent crime, both fitting the profile for what had happened that night in the coffee shop. Then came a big break. Through the phone records, agents uncovered another name, a woman who used to date one of Cooper's old friends. They tracked her down and asked for a conversation. To their surprise, she was eager to talk. She not only believed Carl Cooper had murdered her ex, but she also told the agents that Carl's wife often helped him with his crimes. According to her, Carl's wife, Melissa, would illegally purchase firearms using her maiden name and an outdated address, making it nearly impossible to trace the weapons back to her husband. Melissa wasn't the only one. The girlfriend of Carl's other associates did the same, creating a web of women shielding the gang from direct gun-related charges. This ex-girlfriend wasn't just gossiping. She gave the agents solid information: people, places, purchases, and even weapons. She revealed that there was a third man who had teamed up with Cooper and the barber in the summer of 1997 for a string of robberies. This man was also involved in the drug scene, and detectives figured if anyone knew what really happened during the coffee shop murders, it might be him. But they had a problem. Going undercover to take down a known drug dealer would take months to set up. If they waited, Cooper might vanish. So instead of building a long-term sting, they made a calculated move: arrest the dealer right away on unrelated charges, and use that as leverage to get him to talk. They were running out of time, and Cooper was still out there, living free. By the summer of 1998, a full year after the triple homicide, Carl Cooper was still walking free. Despite round-the-clock surveillance and endless hours of phone tracking, the FBI and local police still didn't have the one thing they needed: hard evidence tying him directly to the murders. But they weren't giving up. Agents continued to monitor Cooper's every move. They tracked his calls, watched his home, followed his car, and kept tabs on his wife, Melissa. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Carl knew he was being watched. The word on the street was out, and Cooper had caught wind of the FBI's growing interest. That complicated things. Meanwhile, a separate cold case unit in Prince George's County, Maryland, just outside D.C., had been revisiting the unsolved murder of Carl's former associate. A local sergeant working the case connected with a key informant, a woman who had once driven the getaway car for Cooper during past armed robberies. She was serving time, but she knew Carl well, his habits, his crew, and how he operated. She didn't know about the coffee shop murders, but she did describe in vivid detail a robbery he committed at a pizza shop in September 1996. Cooper, according to her, was the ringleader. He walked in armed with 2 guns and barked orders while the team, including the barber and her boyfriend, cleaned out the place. No one moved. No one got hurt. That was his way, she explained. Then she talked about another robbery, shortly after the pizza shop hit, in a local park in Hyattsville, Maryland. The plan? Rob couples at night. But what Cooper didn't know was that one of the people he tried to mug was an off-duty police officer. He fired 2 shots, hitting the officer once. A near-deadly encounter that would later prove essential to the case. The wounded officer survived, and once the agents heard the story, they pulled the ballistics report. Sure enough, the details lined up: the type of weapon used, the time of the shooting, even the trajectory of the bullets. This informant wasn't bluffing. She was a gold mine. And most importantly, she confirmed what the investigators suspected. Cooper wasn't just a random criminal. He was a leader of a tightly organized gang that specialized in armed robberies, and occasionally wasn't afraid to pull the trigger. Armed with this information, the FBI started building a RICO case, a powerful legal tool used to take down organized crime. It meant they didn't need to prove every individual act, just that Cooper was running a criminal enterprise. But they needed more. They turned their focus back to Melissa, Carl's wife. She had once purchased a 9mm pistol under a fake name, and now agents were determined to find out where that weapon had gone. They tracked the purchase to an address, Melissa's mother's home, and paid her a visit, claiming they were conducting a routine firearm check. She claimed she hadn't spoken to her daughter in ages and knew nothing about a weapon. Moments after the agents left, their pager lit up. Melissa's mother had immediately contacted Carl, warning him that the FBI was snooping around about the gun. That confirmed it. The weapon still mattered, and Melissa's family was protecting him. Soon after, Melissa herself began spiraling. She was spotted outside her house, sobbing into her phone. She called Carl in a panic, shouting, "I'm calling the police. I don't want to go down for this." Carl, furious, yelled at her to stop. Detectives decided to strike while the pressure was highest. They went to Melissa's workplace unannounced and calmly asked if they could talk. The moment she saw them, her face turned pale. She started trembling. They played it cool. "We just need to ask about a gun. Nothing serious." Shaken and overwhelmed, she finally told them the weapon was being stored at her grandfather's house in Maryland. That night, agents watched as Carl himself smuggled a bag out of their home and took off with a handoff. The FBI followed. When they reached the house, Carl met them at the door, angry and defensive, but the weapon, a 9mm pistol, was sitting right there on the table in plain sight. Legally, that gave the agents the right to seize it. The gun wasn't the exact match for the bullets used in the coffee shop murders, but ballistics testing showed something crucial. It matched the weapon used to shoot the Maryland police officer. That breakthrough gave investigators their first concrete, physical evidence tying Carl to a violent crime. And they were finally closing in, with the 9mm pistol now linked to the shooting of the off-duty officer in Maryland. The FBI finally had a serious charge they could stick to Carl Cooper. Even though it wasn't the smoking gun for the coffee shop murders, it gave law enforcement enough to bring him in and buy more time. But the team wasn't done yet. They knew Carl wasn't working alone, and that one of his old accomplices, the barber, might be the missing piece. Agents had been quietly tailing a local crack dealer who was close to the barber. Once they built up enough charges on him, they gave him a choice: cooperate and help us, or face serious time. He agreed to wear a wire and meet with the barber. During their conversation, the informant casually brought up the triple murder at the coffee shop. At first, the barber denied knowing anything, but then he leaned in and quietly admitted, "It was Carl. He wanted me to hit that place with him. I agreed, but he never called me back. Next thing I know, boom, they're all dead." That single moment was huge. It was the first time anyone directly connected Carl Cooper to the murders with specifics that weren't public knowledge. The agents moved quickly. They arrested the barber, hoping to get more out of him. During questioning, he confirmed what he had told the informant. Carl had been planning to rob the coffee shop and had asked him to help. But at the last minute, Carl went solo. They now had statements from a co-conspirator, the testimony of Carl's wife, and a pattern of violent behavior stretching back years. The FBI decided it was time to move. They arrested Carl Cooper in connection with the police officer shooting and searched his home. Inside, they found ski masks, police uniforms, and different types of ammunition, all suspicious, but nothing that directly tied him to murders. Still, the pressure was getting to him. In interrogation, Carl kept quiet, asking for a lawyer, but the agents weren't in a rush. They already had enough to charge him under the RICO Act for running an organized criminal operation. It wasn't murder, but it would keep him locked up while they continued to build the bigger case. Eventually, Carl thought he could outsmart the system. He volunteered to take a lie detector test to prove his innocence. The test results? He failed miserably. And that's when he cracked. Carl confessed not once, but 3 times. Each version of his story was more detailed than the last. In the end, he admitted everything. He had gone into the coffee shop alone, carrying 2 guns. He waited until the employees were almost done cleaning, then entered through the unlocked front door and ordered them into the back. He claimed he only meant to scare them, maybe take the money from the safe and leave. But when Katie Mahoney tried to run, he fired a warning shot, and something inside him snapped. He lost control. In a panic, Carl opened fire, killing all 3 employees. He returned home, cleaned up, and got rid of the weapons, which were never recovered. In February 2000, more than 2 years after tragedy, Carl Cooper officially pleaded guilty to the triple homicide, the murder of a security guard, the attempted murder of a police officer, and multiple armed robberies. By pleading guilty, he avoided the death penalty, but the court showed no leniency. Carl Cooper was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families of the victims, it was a closure they'd waited years to receive. And for law enforcement, it was proof that patience, persistence, and teamwork could take down even the most calculating criminals. A quiet coffee shop in Georgetown had become the scene of a horrific crime, but justice, in the end, found its way through the noise.